hard to come up with rules to say do this or do that. It's better to speak in terms of guidelines, to say most of the time you want to do this, most of the time, because you can always find exceptions to just about any of these guidelines. But there are going to be exceptions, right? If you're doing a standard website for a standard business or organization, these are good rules of thumb to follow. So to kind of summarize some of the ones that we've talked about so far, we talked about a website being, first of all, content. Having good content. And by good, accurate, updated, and what the visitors of the site need. And again, a lot of times when people talk about web design, they focus on sort of the surface of it, the superficial aspects of it, the color, the fonts, and all that. And that's an important part of web design, but just important in my mind is making sure you have the right content. That doesn't happen by accident. All right? It doesn't happen by accident that you have the right content for a website. Everything you do about a website ought to be thought through and planned. All right? And sites, you know, you may look at this and say, well, it's obvious and all that, but I guess I don't know. I guess obvious to who? The whole point of web design is that you're going to have a whole bunch of decisions to make, starting with what content you're going to have on the site, how you're going to organize the site, what the site is going to look like, what the pages are going to look like. And all these ought to be deliberate decisions. All right? And they ought to be deliberate decisions guided by the goals of your organization and, just as importantly, the goals of the people that are visiting the site. All right? So content is a design principle, choosing the correct content. Having a site that is well organized is something that we talked about. And well organized, we talked about a couple different ways that it could be well organized. One is we can talk about the overall site being well organized. In other words, the information is categorized in such a way that it's clear to the user where to find everything. It doesn't do any good to have a website that has tons of great information if no one can ever find anything on it. All right? It's amazing. When I have talked to people that have developed websites that aren't particularly good, the most common complaint of their users is that they can't find the information that they're looking for. And sometimes web managers or web masters or whatever you want to call them get defensive and say, well, that content is there. But if people can't find it, it doesn't do any good if it's there. So therefore, the whole site ought to be organized, and it ought to be organized in a way that makes sense to the users or the site visitors. It doesn't do any good if I, as the web developer, understand the way the site is organized, and it makes perfect sense to me. It needs to make sense to people outside of the organization. It needs to make sense to the users. So the site overall ought to be organized, and individual pages ought to be organized. And this is where we use things like color and borders and putting space between things and different fonts and so on. We don't just do it to make the pages look nice. Obviously, we do want the pages to look good. No one wants to develop an ugly website. But we do it in a purposeful way to sort of help guide the user through the way that our pages are organized. So it becomes obvious that that green column on the left side of the page is a navigation. All right? And the contact information's in a blue strip on the bottom of the page or whatever. All right? So our pages are organized, and we use these things visually to help emphasize the stuff that needs emphasis. All right? So that would be a second guideline for web development. A third guideline is consistency. And that also can mean several different things. Consistency in terms of how pages are laid out. Now that doesn't mean that every page needs to be laid out in an identical fashion. All right? But there should be some sort of consistency to it. You don't want to make it look like you are visiting two different sites as you navigate around your website. So stuff should appear in a consistent place. And usually that means having a banner on the top of the page, having a navigation somewhere, either along the top, along the left, or along the right. Maybe having a footer with additional information, and then having an area for content information. Now we can go to different sites and see that not every page is organized identically, but there is some sort of consistency. All right? Consistency also relates to the terminology that we use within our website. And I'll give you an example of how that could be very confusing. Years ago, I worked for a software company that dealt with people in the food business. All right? Now, in the vocabulary of that business, principal, manufacture, and maybe even one other word. Principal, manufacturer. And there might have even been another word. All meant the same thing. All right? So if we were developing a website, we would want to keep the use of the term consistent. If we're calling those people principals, we would want to call them principals on every page. We wouldn't want to call them manufacturers on one page and principals on the other, because that would be confusing to people. All right? So you'd want to be consistent with the way that you phrase things. So for example, on a site for colleges, maybe for a college, maybe we would have a page for prospective students, and we call it prospective students. We wouldn't want to call that something else on another page. Call it future students or something like that, because people are liable to see that and think that that means something different. So be consistent in the terminology that you use. Call things the same way. All right? That's a guideline. Another guideline is sort of a consistency between the appearance should sort of match the content. Does anyone know what I mean by that? That the appearance should match the content? Yes?
If your page is about space, you don't want to put unicorns.
Okay, if your page is about space, you don't want to put unicorns and ponies about on it. That's probably a good idea. Does anyone else have another example? The example I always give is, I think of two examples. How many of you have been on the Barbie website within the past month? Oh, okay, well, that's fine. You're not allowed to answer this question. Only the people that have not been on the Barbie site. What color do you think is the Barbie website? Pink. Let's see if we're right. You don't have to justify or explain. That's okay. No judgments.
Okay, get on my computer and you put the little kid in front of it and just play the party games. I delete my web history.
Okay, I'm pulling up the site for Barbie, and looky here. Sure enough, one of the main colors is pink. All right. Okay. Can someone name a heavy metal band?
August Burns Red.
How do you spell that?
August Burns and then Red.
August Burns Red. This is a slightly surprising. I was guess what color their site is going to be, and what would you have guessed? Black, and that's what I would have guessed too. It's not black, but it does have a certain look for it. Let's go more old school. Let's try Ozzy. Yeah. Well, Black Sabbath would be cheating, but Ozzy I think is fair game. All right, and again, wow, looky here. It's mostly black. All right. So the point is that could you imagine? Both of those might be very well designed sites. We didn't spend a lot of time looking at them, but I'm willing to say, yeah, both of them are well designed sites, but they look totally different. Well, why is that? Well, they have different audiences in mind, and they have different sorts of content, and the appearance that they picked matched the content that they had. Now, those are very obvious choices, but you could have less obvious choices as well. What sort of look would you want from a bank? You'd want it to look very professional. You wouldn't want unicorn gifs on the side, or you wouldn't want pastel colors or something like that. Again, the word that a lot of people, and I think this is a dumb word, but people use it all the time, is branding, right? You want to get across your brand's look. Apple, I think we looked at them the other day. We could almost guess what their site is going to look like. The whole idea of Apple computers is meant to be they're very sophisticated and well-designed and sleek and simple to use and all that. And their website matches that corporate image. All right? On the other hand, a kid's website, if it was done up in a very serious manner, like a news site, well, it wouldn't have any appeal to the audience. So, I think a good way to summarize that would be to say that the appearance of the site should match the content in tone. Now, here's where we might point out that there could be exceptions to this. What might be an exception to this, where you don't want the appearance of the site to match the tone? There's one website that I'm thinking that's a classic example of this. I'm thinking of the website The Onion. The Onion is a satirical newspaper, so it's meant to be fun, it's meant to be humorous. I'm not going to pull it up because who knows what's going to be on their page today. I don't want to have to explain to my dean why I brought something up on the screen. But The Onion is meant to be humorous. It's meant to be a fun site. Yet it looks like a news site. It's done in a very professional-looking news site look. Well, that's like part of the joke. It's like pretending that this is a real-life newspaper and here's some humorous stories it came up with. So that's a case where they broke this guideline, but they did it deliberately because that sort of adds to the appeal of it. So, again, getting back to these are pretty solid guidelines, and most of the time you should follow them. But if you think hard enough, you can find exceptions to all of these. One other good, well-designed guideline is be sure your purpose is clearly stated. And again, you go to a website, you should know immediately what the website's for. You shouldn't have to guess that, gee, what is this organization? Again, that can be done, or that can not be followed, and it can be effectively done. For example, there was, for either Halo or Halo 2, Microsoft created a site called I Love Bees. and it looked like it was a site for a beekeeper when you first went to it. It looked like it was just a hobbyist website. But then when you got into the site, it became clear that something else is going on. They made it look like something had infiltrated the system and blah, 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 blah. And it was like some backstory information for the game Halo. Now, in that case, they intentionally didn't make the site match the content. The appearance of the site matched the content. And they didn't. They hid their purpose. Why? The thought was to make it viral, where people would be talking about it. Look, I found this site, and gee, isn't this weird? And it got people talking about that site, and it was a very effective ad campaign for them. Let me see if I can pull it up. I'm going to use a site called the Wayback Machine. The Wayback Machine allows you to go and see what websites look like years ago. First of all, I'm going to see if I Love Bees is live. It isn't. The original one. So I'm going to go and pull up the Wayback Machine. I think we used this in when I wanted to show Leo Burnett last time, because unfortunately they made their website a little better, so I couldn't use it as a good example. So let's go in and pull it up from December of 2004. And notice how in the background it looks like a nice little site about bees, but you get this sort of fake error message. And you can read the mission log. And there's little audio clips and so on and so forth. So this is an advertising campaign and a way for them to get interest in it, for get people to say, gee, I wonder what this site is about. All right, and it went viral and people passed it on, and it was part of a good marketing campaign. So almost any of these guidelines that we have, you could think of cases where you can sort of break the guidelines. Do keep in mind, though, that you better be clever if you're going to try something like that, right? Because otherwise people are just going to look at it and say, this is dumb, all right, and ignore it, all right? So sort of the default is to go by the book and do these things, but especially for websites that are, say, for the entertainment business or for a creative field, then it's okay probably to think a little bit outside the box, because people expect that from creative sort of organizations. Whereas, if you're a CPA firm or something, people aren't going to expect your website to look like a game or look like it's a children's site or something like that. All right. So we could probably talk about more of these, but in some respects, one thing I hear from students sometimes when I teach this section of the course is they're like, well, these things are just common sense. Who would make a site for Barbie that looked like a site for a heavy metal band? Who would make a site where pages were inconsistent and didn't look like each other? Well, my point of all this is whatever we do in creating our site ought to be done as a set of conscious decisions. We don't just throw things together. We think about them in advance and plan what we're going to do, and in that way that's going to give us the best results. It's just like writing a term paper. It's just like planning a cross-country drive. You could shoot by the hip and say, I want to go to California, so I'm going to get my car and drive west. All right? You'd probably end up in California eventually, but you wouldn't necessarily take the best or most efficient route. All right? So planning And deliberately thinking about each of these steps is what we want to do in terms of developing a site. So for your project, there's a procedure that I want you to follow. And it starts off thinking very general, and then it narrows down to more and more and more specifics. All right? The basis of this is, number one, starting off by thinking about the content of the site. What are we going to put on the site? Remember, we said last time that content is king or content is queen. It rules. People don't come to the site, to your site, to admire the beautiful design. People come to it to get some information or to do something that they need to do. So thinking about and deciding what your customers need to do or what information they need is sort of the first job. All right? And it's actually probably the first two jobs. All right? We think in general terms and we think in more specific terms. Then we start thinking about some of these other things. How are we going to organize the information? What is the appearance going to look like? And so on. So let's pull up in Canvas the description of what I want you to do. And we'll go through as much of this as we can today, and we'll finish this up on Tuesday. These kinds of things, in my mind, are really the heart of web design. Not what colors you're going to use or what fonts you're going to use. That comes later. It's just like designing an automobile. Yeah, making the interior look nice or making the outside look nice, that's important. That has an appeal to people. All right? But designing the car to be safe, designing the car to be fuel efficient, designing the car so it's easy to repair, those are all things that are probably more important than that it looks nice. All right. So here's an overview of the project, somewhere over here. All right, you get to pick whatever topic you like. I suggest you pick something that's fun. All right, pick something that you're interested in. You're going to probably work harder if you develop a site for something that you're interested in than if you just randomly picked a topic. All right, I had a student that did a website about his motorcycles. Well, he loves his motorcycles. He's not about to put pictures of his motorcycle on a bad website. All right? So he worked hard to make sure that website looked good, to do his motorcycles proud. All right? And I would suggest you do the same approach. Now, pick a topic that you enjoy. Pick a topic that's neither too narrow nor too broad. Okay? And this is where I can help. All right? Neither too narrow or too broad is a good idea. Too narrow would be, too broad would be something like I'm going to do a website about sports. Well, you can't possibly cover everything about sports in 6 to 8 pages, right? I mean, how many sports are there? You know, you can barely scratch the surface. On the other hand, you know, if you picked a topic of the history of the Cleveland Indians mascot Slider, that might be a little too narrow. I don't think you could get 6 to 8 pages out of that. So the idea is you want to pick a topic that's like right there in the middle, where You can get 6 to 8 pages worth of content, and you're doing a good job covering it, and it's neither too broad nor too narrow. And this is where I can help. Almost any topic that you pick can be either expanded or contracted to be the right size. So if you have an idea about this, we can talk about it. A lot of people pick video games, something related to video games. Well, video games itself would be a big topic, right? So you could narrow that down by saying, I'm going to do about mobile video games, maybe. Video games for your phone. Or puzzle video games. Or RPGs. Or whatever. Or pick a particular game or game series. I'm going to do about the Final Fantasy series or something like that. And that way you could either expand or contract that to meet the requirements of 6 to 8 pages. Each page should contain a reasonable amount of content. There's some judgment in there, right? What is a reasonable amount? I guess use for a guide what you see typically on pages on the web. A page with one sentence on it is probably not enough content. A page that has 15 paragraphs on it, there's probably too much content on it. So think in terms of what you normally see on a website for appropriate amount of content. We want the site to be technically sound, well-designed, and to effectively communicate the intended message. All right? The site is done. This project consists of 2 parts. A design document, which is sort of your plan, and then the final deliverable, which is the finished website. All right? I'm going to talk about the plan first. The plan consists of 5 sections. And just as a memory aid, you can use words that all start with S for each of these sections. The approach that I'm taking here was in a book that used to be a required textbook for this class, and you can still find copies in our library, or probably even through Safari Books online, and that is the elements of the user experience. Yes?
Going back to the guidelines, the principles following the design, when you were talking about technically sound, do you mean by adding sounds to the page?
No. Technically sound, technically solid. All right, think of sound like, not like audio sound, but sound meaning like, in other words, like, what would be, the foundation of that house is sound. It means that it's solid. All right. So in other words, you use the proper HTML and CSS. Your links work. Your images work. You've coded it in a way that technically is correct and solid. All right. Strategy section relates to the goals of the site. Scope relates to the requirements of the site. Structure relates to sort of the site map. skeleton relates to the page layout, or sometimes called a wireframe. And finally, surface relates to a prototype. Think of a prototype as sort of being a rough draft of your website. Again, any task that you do is going to be better typically if you think about it before you do it. All right? Doesn't matter if you're writing a term paper or planning a trip or planning repairs in your house or anything like that. Any project that you're going to do, if you're flying by the seat of your pants and you're just winging it as you go along, you're not going to get as good results as if you step back and think systematically of the approach that you're going to take. All right? The first section is strategy. And that's where you do a couple things in the strategy sections. First of all, you come up with a high-level description of the site. Maybe I'm going to do a website about the video game Tetris. All right? Now that by itself is not probably sufficient. The more specific you can define your purpose, the more or the better that you can actually go and achieve it. So maybe I'm going to develop a website about the game Tetris, and it's meant for students that are learning how to develop video games. Or it's meant for gamers. Or it's meant for the general public. Or maybe it's meant for all three groups. It's meant for everyone. Maybe it's meant for kids. You know, hey kids, you know, you like playing your fancy newfangled video games. Here's one of the early video games that started the ball rolling. All right? Maybe it's meant for old-timers who haven't played a video game in years but fondly remember playing Tetris. All right? The better that you can define your purpose and define your audience, the better job you can do creating your website. Another example. Let's say I was going to do a website about classical music. All right? I could go so many different directions with that, right? I could define a website, I could create a website about classical music for the general public. People that really don't necessarily know a lot about classical music. Maybe they played in the band in school, but they don't really know a lot about it and haven't thought about it since a music appreciation class they had. Or maybe I can develop it for people who are fans of classical music, who want to know about new releases and concerts in the area and so on and so forth. Maybe I want to develop it for adults. Maybe I want to develop it for high school kids. Maybe I want to develop it for children. The more clear that I can describe what I want, the better off I'm going to be, because then I can really target the needs of those particular groups. You know, the first rule of any sort of communication is to know your audience. All right? So it's not enough to say this is a topic. You focus on the topic that you're going to have, and you think about who the audience is going to be. All right? So you can imagine a site about classical music. If my audience was musicians, that site's going to have a lot different stuff than if my site was for listeners, right? my site was for musicians, I might have information or articles about where to get your musical instrument repaired if it's broken. All right? Or advice on buying a used musical instrument. Or what are some local community groups that you can join if you want to play in an ensemble or something like that. If I was developing it for high school kids, maybe I include a page about what concert etiquette is, okay? Because, you know, people at classical music concerts can get really fussy, right? You don't walk in the middle of a piece. You wait until the piece is over and then walk in after that. So if you're late, you stand outside for a few minutes till it's done. You actually don't applaud in the gaps. You wait until the entire piece is done. So if a piece has 3 parts, there might be a slight pause between the first and second part. You don't applaud there. I think it's silly, but that's the way it is, right? You should applaud when you want to applaud, right? I mean, come on, you know. But again, that's sort of the expectations that people have. So maybe for younger people that don't know that, you might have a page about that. Or a page about what are the main instruments of the orchestra. Now, a musician's going to know that, right? They've been playing in an orchestra since they were 10 years old, probably. But a high school kid, or someone that hasn't been exposed to classical music, might not have any idea what that is. Maybe examples of different eras of classical music. Again, a musician might know that, you know, very well, but a layperson wouldn't necessarily know that. So when you develop your strategy, you don't just pick your topic, but you think a little bit about the audience that you're going to be reaching. Now, this is where, when you identify your audience, really, you may have multiple audiences that's going to visit your site, depending on, again, how big or specialized the site is. All right? For example, we have a school, you know, we have Loring Community College. Who are some of the different audiences that could be visiting LC's page? Or different groups of people that would be visiting LC's site? Right. Graduating seniors from high school. So graduating high school students who are thinking about where to go to next year. That's one group of people. And, pardon me?
Their parents.
The parents of graduating seniors. All right? What's another group?
People in the workforce.
People in the workforce that maybe they're working at a job that they don't really like and they want to upgrade their skills. All right? What would another group be? Trades? People that are already in a trade or people that are looking to get in a trade?
Yes.
Yeah, people are looking to get into a trade. All right? Again, maybe they're working in a job that they're not really crazy about and they might look to see, you know, are there classes on welding or welding programs or you know, nursing or culinary or things like that. Other groups of people. Instructors, faculty and staff. All right, we would go on that site to look for certain things. When our meetings are, when grades are due. Don't read anything into this because I love my job, but when is spring break? All right. You know, do we have a snow day today? You know, all these things are things what faculty and staff might visit. And we could probably think of others too, just off the top of my head. Community members, right? You might not be interested in getting a degree and graduating from LC, but maybe you want to participate in some of the cultural events that LC has. You know, there's all sorts of different performances at the Stocker Center. There's also non-credit classes where you can come and take a class in this, that, or the other that isn't necessarily like for a degree, but you can pick up your skills. I know they have for people that have no computer skills, they have like non-credit classes just to like to teach people how to use the mouse and how to move around and stuff like that. Or they might have a class in photography, that's non-credit. It's not a full semester, but maybe it meets 4 or 5 sessions and teaches you the basics of a topic, just for personal growth or whatever, lifelong learning. People that want to use a fitness center, all right? Fitness center is a great facility, and as a student, I think you get to use it for free. You just have to go and sit through one of their orientation sessions, and then you can use that for free. I mean, great facility in there. The point is that especially when you're talking about bigger projects, there isn't one group of people called the user. There are multiple groups of users, all right? And you want to do your best to hit the most important needs of all those different user groups. Now, there might be some overlapping, right? Parents of a high school senior probably have some of the same goals as graduating seniors. People in the community that are looking to maybe change careers might have some of the same goals as people that are brand new out of high school that are looking at starting their academic career. But there are going to be differences as well, right? Someone who is, in their mid-30s might be interested, will the college courses that I took 15 years ago transfer? Whereas a high school student probably doesn't have that question, all right? So, the first rule of communication is to know your audience. On websites, you don't just have one audience. And a mistake that a lot of web developers use is they talk about the user as though there's one kind of user that's visiting their site, where in reality, there's several different kinds. So what you do, you develop a high-level description. You identify the audience groups, and you create what are called personas. Now, this might sound hokey, but what you actually do is you make up a fictional person that represents a group of people. James is an 18-year-old high school senior at Elyria High who is interested in, who loves computers and wants to work with computers. Lisa is a 28-year-old person who is working in retail, who does not want to work in retail anymore, who is interested in healthcare careers. You actually make up fictional people and little backstories about them. Now, why do you do that? Well, you do that for a couple reasons. You do that, first of all, to show that, hey, my website isn't just appealing to one group of people, but I've identified the different groups of people. And then when you're going through and making decisions about what content is on the site and how to organize it, you try to look through those people's eyes. What's going to help James find information about computer careers? What's going to help Lisa find information about healthcare careers? And so on and so forth. All right? That's what I mean by creating these user groups and identifying these user groups and creating personas. Then finally, you come up with goals for these groups. All right? You actually, I think I just said you have 3 goals for each. For the user, a prioritized list of 3 user goals that your project will address, and 3 of your goals, in other words, 3 goals of the organization that you're doing this for. All right? But really, you could define goals for each of the personas. A high school kid, one of their goals might be to find out, does LC offer the program that I'm interested in? All right? Goal for a parent of a high school senior might be, how much is it going to cost? What financial aid is available for students going to LC? What are the rules about financial aid? What do I need to do to make sure my student gets financial aid? And so on. So that is the strategy section. Right up top, we don't think about how the site is going to look, or what colors we're going to use, or what fonts we're going to use, or anything like that. We start at the goals of the user, identifying who the users are, identifying what the goals are for the user, and identifying the different users that are going to be visiting the site. And again, there could be goals for each user group, different goals. Goals for a community member might be, what are the non-credit classes available for someone with my interests? What culture events are going on at LC this weekend? And so on. All right? This becomes very challenging when you're dealing with large websites. All right? Because there's so many different groups of people, and they all have different goals. But for the kind of websites that you're doing, it's going to be a little easier. For example, let's talk about my classical music site. Let's say I've narrowed it down and say that I want to do a classical music site for high school students. All right? What could my 3 different user groups be among high school students visiting my classical music site? Those who play an instrument? Those who want to play an instrument? Third might be high school music teacher. All right? So if you are offering a course in music, you could use this site as a resource. So it may be geared towards high school students, but another kind of visitor to it might be a high school teacher that is going to try to incorporate your site into their plans. Video games. If I did a video game on Tetris, who could the groups of users be? People that have never played Tetris, people who have played Tetris. Who would the third group be? That's a good question, but I'm sure we could think of something. People that played the original Tetris but haven't played it since then. All right? So no matter what your topic is, we want to be, in this section, we want to be very specific and narrow down the specific audience and narrow down to not just one audience, but several different groups that compose our entire audience. And when we want to identify what the goals are. The goals should be simple sentences. For example, a goal for people, high school students that want to play an instrument might be, what instrument is right for me? Right? What instrument is right for me? Maybe that would involve having audio clips so that they can listen to them and say, oh, that one sounds pretty good, or oh, that one doesn't sound so good. All right? What you don't want to do in your goals section is talk about general web design. You don't want to say a goal of my site is to have a clear navigation. Well, of course you want a clear navigation, right? That's not really a goal of why someone is visiting your site, to go and see how good your navigation is. This is content-based. In other words, what content people are expecting to get out of your site. That's what the goals represent. All right? We spent the longest time talking about this one. The next 4 parts of this actually go fairly quickly. The second one takes a little bit of time. The third, fourth, and fifth one will breeze by. So we should wrap this up on Tuesday of next week. Any questions at this point? If you have not already, read through the documentation about the project, and we'll finish up that part on Tuesday.